Hola clase, this is our last topic of the semester, the preterite versus the imperfect. Both of them are different verb tenses, and both of them are used to talk about actions, past actions and events, but the use of one or the other convey different meanings. Before digging into the topic, I just wanted to show you this video about why is conjugation so tricky for English speakers. In English, we conjugate all the time, but sometimes it's harder to realize that we are conjugating. But in Spanish, it's very obvious all the conjugations that there are.
The whole idea of conjugation is weird in the first place. I mean, in English, we don't really conjugate. I guess technically we do. I work, you work, he works, we work, you both work, they work. Only two forms of the verb. That sure seems more like rule exception than it does conjugation. This is conjugation. Trabajo, trabajas, trabaja, trabajamos, trabajáis, trabajan. So in Spanish, we have to conjugate pretty much every verb, when in English, we really don't. That's tricky at first. And right when you start to get the hang of it, you're bombarded with the past tense. In English, we also technically conjugate in the past tense, but it's even less obvious. I worked, he worked, you worked, we worked, you both worked, they worked. Only one form of the verb this time. The fact that conjugation is technically taking place is more apparent with the verb to be. I was, you were, he was, we were, you both were, they were. Two forms of the verb there. So back to more rule exception. But for every other verb, I think every other verb, I don't teach English, there's only one form in the past tense. I spoke, you spoke, he spoke, we spoke, you both spoke, they spoke. So conjugation is tricky for us English speakers in the past tense, just like it is in the present tense, because we basically don't do it. But in Spanish, they do, which means you have to memorize a new set of endings for the past tense. AR, ER, IR, irregulars, all over again. But then you'll quickly discover there are two different past tenses in Spanish, the preterite and the imperfect, and each has a unique set of endings. So in Spanish, in the past tense, you have to memorize two new sets of endings. But that's...
Okay, so for our first exercise, we're going to have a conjugations review in the preterite. So complete the following sentences with the verb in the parentheses conjugated in the preterite tense according to the subject. And remember that if you have a reflexive verb, you always have to conjugate the reflexive pronoun and then place the reflexive pronoun in front of the conjugated verb. Here you can check your answers. Then we have exercise 2. We're going to review the conjugations of the imperfect. So again, complete the following sentences with the verb in the parentheses conjugated in the imperfect tense according to the subject. And here you can check your answers. Okay, we're gonna dig into our topic. First, we're gonna see the preterite. So we use the preterite to talk about completed actions in the past, actions that have a beginning and an end in the past. So if you would put your past actions in a timeline, the preterite is the tense that you would use to show definite actions. So you can put it in definite points in a timeline. You can set a beginning and an end of an action in the past. So for example, if you have a dog like this, qué bueno que llegaste, se desmayó el árbol. If you put it in a timeline, in the past, what happened first? The first event is that the tree fell down, se cayó el árbol. And then another event in the past happened, tú llegaste. So you are using the preterite to set a timeline of events. First, the tree fell down and then you arrived. Se cayó el árbol y tú llegaste. If we have another example, qué bueno que llegaste, el sofá explotó. First you have, in the past, the first action that happened would be el sofá explotó, the sofa exploded, you arrived. And then you arrived. Qué bueno que llegaste, el sofá explotó. So, as you can see, the preterite tense is used to talk about completed actions that you could put in a timeline, and there are definite points. So, why do we use the preterite? To indicate what we did or what happened. Then We all can also use the preterite when we want to express what you were doing with imperfect tense and then something happened. So the preterite is used for the action that interrupts that past action that was happening or that someone was doing. So you can use the following structure: imperfect, cuando, preterite. So el sillón estaba así cuando llegué. So in the past, what was like that? What was the action that was happening? The couch was like that. El sillón estaba así. And then something happened. Cuando llegué, I arrived. So I are using the imperfect to describe a past action, not focusing on the beginning nor the end of the action. You're just describing that the couch was like that. And then you're using the preterite to set a point of time. I arrived. We're going to continue with the imperfect. So the imperfect, on the other hand, is used to talk about past actions that don't have any specific beginning nor ending. So you are not focusing on the beginning or the end of the action. You're just describing a past action. So there are no definite points in a timeline. You're just describing the background, describing the surrounding of a past action. So I have here an example. En mis tiempos no teníamos internet ni videoconsolas. Salíamos fuera y hablábamos unos con otros. Era horrible. So what is this grandpa doing? He's describing his how was life on his time. And he's just saying we didn't have internet nor these video games. We used to go outside and talk to each other. And then in the last one, he says, it was horrible. So he's just describing a past action, the environment surrounding a past action. So if we could put the uses of the imperfect in a list, we will put 4 different uses. And the principal use of the imperfect is to talk about what we used to do or what we would always do or what used to happen. So when you're talking about habitual actions in the past, things that used to happen, things that you used to do, or things that you would always do. We also use the imperfect for any descriptions in the past. So that background information, when we describe things, people, and places in the past, it can be physical description of people, places, or things, or animals, or it can be states, emotional states or mental states of people and animals. So here I have some example. Describing things. En la Navidad pasada, nuestro árbol era hermoso. So I'm describing the tree. The tree was beautiful. So I use imperfect. Nuestro árbol era hermoso. I'm just describing the thing, the tree, saying it was beautiful. When we describe people, ourselves or somebody else, de niño yo era bajo, or de niña yo era baja. So as a kid, I was short. Or when we're describing places, for example, mi casa era pequeña y estaba cerca de la escuela. So my house was small and it was near the school. So as you can see, again, here we have ser and estar in the imperfect because we're just describing places, physically or locations of places. All of this goes in the imperfect when we're describing them in the past. We also use the imperfect to tell age and time in the past. So to tell age, anything about somebody's age, in the past, you will always use the imperfect. Tenía 20 años cuando empecé a estudiar en Upstate. Tenía 18 años cuando me gradué. I was 18 when I graduated. El año pasado yo tenía 26 años. Last year I had 26 years. I was 26 years old. And when we tell time, to tell what, we use the imperfect to tell what time it was or when it was when something happened. So when we're saying exactly what time it was when something happened in the past. For example, eran las 7 de la mañana cuando me levanté. So it was 7 7 in the morning when I woke up. So here I'm saying on a specific time. Eran las 7 de la mañana. Or era temprano, it was early, cuando sonó el teléfono, the phone rang, on a specific time. So I'm using the imperfect to tell what time it was or when it was when something in the past happened. But if you want to express at what time you did something in the past, then you don't use imperfect. So for example, if you're saying, I woke up yesterday at 7, you would say, me levanté ayer a las 7 de la mañana. So you're using the preterite in the verb, me levanté ayer a las 7 de la mañana. Here, when you use the imperfect, you're just saying what time it was or when it was. So you're always going to use the verb ser conjugated in the imperfect when you're telling time in the imperfect tense. You're just telling when it was when something happened. And the last one is to describe simultaneous actions in the past. You use the following structure: imperfect, mientras, and imperfect. So here I have an example. La princesa leía mientras caminaba. The princess was reading while walking. So simultaneous actions, ongoing actions in the past, you always use the imperfect. So the book states some words that generally indicate imperfect because they don't convey the meaning of a definite moment in the past, but of recurring past actions. So that's why expression as de joven, when I was young, de niño, niña, as a child, a menudo, often, a veces, sometimes, generalmente, generally, normalmente, usually, siempre, always, todos los días, todas las semanas, todos los años, todos los meses. So every day, every week, every year, every month, and other words, they kind of like indicate already the idea of recurring past actions or recurring actions. So that's why you use imperfect when you use these expressions, usually, because you're already conveying that ongoing past action or habitual action that was developing in the past or that you were doing in the past. So I have here one more video to show you. So remember the uses of the imperfect. So the imperfect is used to describe age in the past, to tell time, what time it was when something happened, background information of past actions, also habitual actions, right? Or ongoing actions in the past. And maybe the following rule of thumb will help you remember when to use imperfect and when to use the preterite.
Okay, in English, we have several ways to speak in the past. You can say, I worked, you can say, I was working, or you can say, I used to work. And remember, in Spanish, we have two ways, the preterite and the imperfect. Here's the rule of thumb I told you about. This rule of thumb will help you choose correctly between the preterite and the imperfect at least 90% of the time. If you want to say, I worked in English, use the preterite tense in Spanish. And if you want to say, I was working or I used to work in English, use the imperfect tense in Spanish. So there you have it. Use the preterite tense when you would say I worked or I spoke or I ate. Use the imperfect tense when you'd say stuff like I was working or I used to work or I was speaking or I used to speak. Seriously, it's that easy.
Okay, when you're saying what you used to do or we were always doing, you're conveying the meaning of a habitual past action. So that's what the imperfect does. That's the meaning it conveys. So, but you also use the imperfect to describe age, tell time, and background information of past actions. Any type of physical, mental description, emotional state description, then you would use the imperfect tense. So we have ejercicio número 3, exercise number 3, the preterite or the imperfect. If you want to translate the following sentences from English to Spanish, you decide between the imperfect or the preterite for the underlined verbs. So would you translate these verbs underlined into the imperfect or the preterite, according to what we saw in this lesson? Here you can check your answers. Okay, as a summary, choosing one or the other, the preterite or the imperfect, convey different meanings in Spanish. The preterite conveys the meaning of a completed past action. It conveys the meaning of a definite moment in the past in which something happened or someone did something. On the other hand, the imperfect is used to describe past events and actions, expressing the idea in English of something you used to do or would always do in the past. That means habitual actions in the past. This tense is frequently used to describe people, things, places in the past, either physical descriptions, mental or emotional states. All of this goes in the imperfect. Also, you use the imperfect to tell time and age in the past and to describe simultaneous actions in the past or ongoing actions in the past. The last exercise we have is the preterite versus the imperfect. So you have to choose between the imperfect or the preterite for the following sentences. And here you can check your answers. Gracias.